Greetings. Welcome to W1U5 on instruction. In this unit, we will discuss some general features of instruction in a very broad fashion. In the earlier unit, we discussed some of the features which are important to understand how brains learn. And we saw that an understanding of these features will be very helpful for teachers. In this unit, we will understand what instruction is and what are the elements of instruction in a very broad sense. For learning, there are many theories as we already discussed. One of them is constructivism, which we generally adopt in our further discussions. This says that people can only learn by constructing or producing their own knowledge. Learning requires active manipulation of the material to be learned and cannot occur passively. That is the basic principle tenet of constructivism. The knowledge, skills, and attitude the learner needs to construct are stated as the learning outcomes. Now, what is instruction? There can be several different ways of defining instruction or understanding what instruction is or explaining what instruction is. But in a very simplistic fashion, if you try to define instruction from the purpose of instruction, the purpose of instruction is to help people learn. So, essentially, whatever helps people learn becomes instruction. If production of knowledge is what learner does, what teacher does is to foster that production. So, this fostering the production is termed as instruction. That is, we define instruction from what it does to the learner. Okay. So, the instruction is intentional facilitation of learning towards an identified learning goal, which can be stated as a competency or an outcome. Here it is important to realize it is intentional. There is a specific intent with which the instructor is working. So it is intentional and it facilitates the learning. So intentional facilitation. And this learning is not in a very generic sense, but it is towards an identified learning goal, towards a specific outcome. So all these three aspects are important: intentional, and it facilitates learning, and it is towards a very specific learning goal or what you can call as the outcome. So it is the deliberate arrangement of learning activities and conditions to promote the attainment of the intended goal, which is the learning outcome or competency. And because it is intentional facilitation, it tends to be prescriptive. At present, how does instruction take place? Many of the current practices are mostly lecture based. Generally, we teachers tend to follow the methods that our teachers followed. And perhaps many of us did not like them as students. And it's also quite possible that our students also do not appreciate what we do now as teachers. It's not that these are all universal statements, but often it tends to be that case. Students learn better, and these have been proved in several empirical studies. Students learn better when, first, they are provided information about the course outcomes or competencies, their responsibilities, and the criteria used to evaluate their performance. That is very important. Then assessment is in alignment with the things they are supposed to be able to do at the end of the course. That means assessment is in alignment with the outcomes. And the third important aspect, instruction facilitates the students to attain the stated course outcomes or competencies. Thus, all these three are important. The course outcomes must be stated beforehand. Assessment must be in alignment with the course outcomes, and instruction must facilitate the students to attain the stated course outcomes. So, how do we conduct a course? First, we write course outcomes, competencies, which of course are communicated to the learners upfront. Then we conduct instruction to facilitate the students to attain the stated outcomes or competencies and measure the attainment of outcomes through appropriate assessment. So, all these three become important. Now, what is an instructional unit? It's a convenient term. A course is described in terms of its course outcomes. If the course outcome is a fairly complex one with several sub features, then sometimes we may elaborate the course outcome into competencies if it is required only. So, course outcome may be elaborated if needed into competencies. There is not a standard word that anyone prescribes, not accreditation or anyone, but we are saying sometimes it is convenient to elaborate the course outcome into a list of competencies. One instructional unit is associated with one CO, or in case where the CO is elaborated into competencies, one competency, one single competency. So, an instructional unit will have 1 to 5 and sometimes more classroom sessions, and each classroom session may be approximately 50 minutes to 1 hour duration, or an instructional unit may have one or more 2-hour laboratory sessions or field trips, etc. It is the basic unit that we use in our discussion on instruction. So, an instructional unit addresses one single competency or one single CO. Competency when the CO is elaborated into when a CO is elaborated into competencies. Otherwise, one single CO. So, instruction should be effective, efficient, and engaging. 3 E's are generally called. And instruction has constructs, instructional situations, and instructional types or approaches. Irrespective of the instructional situation and the approach, instruction should be effective, engaging, and efficient. Effective instruction should facilitate the learners to attain the intended learning outcomes. So, it has to be effective and it must be appealing. The learners must find it attractive. So, it must be engaging. Instructor should enable learners to actively engage with the knowledge they are expected to acquire. And very important that instruction is also efficient. Instruction should be efficient in its use of resources, irrespective of the situation and instructional methods. In almost all practical scenarios, resources are limited. Whether it is a private organization or publicly funded organization, most of the institutions would have resource shortages. So, it is important that the instruction is efficient in terms of its use of resources. And instructional situations are characterized by the values and conditions. What are values? These are the learning goals, the priorities, methods, who has power over the entire learning activity. And conditions include the actual content that is delivered, something about the learner, learning environment, and development constraints. These are all important. Values, these are also called instructional situations. Uh, the values can be about learning goals, competencies, COs, etc. An example can be write good programs in C encountered commonly in business applications. Priorities, covering the syllabus when the scope of the content is too large. Perhaps in a given context, that is the priority, completing the syllabus. The method, use the program share critic method. That is the method that we are planning to adopt. Who has the power? In most of the Indian context, it is obviously the management through HOD has the power. Then conditions of the instructional situations. One is obviously the content, what is actually the content to be delivered. Example, problem solving through programming using C. Then learner, who are the learners? Perhaps students with low entrance test rankings or low known cognitive abilities, habituated to rote learning. How do we know this? Perhaps we have done some kind of entry level characterization of the learners. Learning environment, not so comfortable a classroom with only a blackboard, no other learning technologies or facilities available. Instructional development constraints, time available for designing the course is relatively less for whatever reasons. Then instruction types or approaches, they can be face to face. There can be several. Some of the common ones are face to face. In fact, this is the most common one, face to face. The instructor faces the learners and it's a face to face instruction. It can be a blended mode where there is a face to face as well as remote through an appropriate electronic means. It can be a totally online course. It can be an impersonal MOOCs, that is massive open online courses where the number of participants is extremely large and practically there is no one-to-one, there is no interaction as such between the instructor and the learners. There can be several others, but these are the major ones. Each type of instruction is conducted using some instructional methods. The instructional methods should preferably incorporate some principles of learning. Now, instructional methods for face-to-face instruction type, as we mentioned, this is the most common one. There are a very large number of instructional methods because over the years face-to-face instruction has been most common. Several methods have been developed and their efficiency, their ability to engage and their effectiveness are all well established today. Some of the popular instructional methods which can be used with face-to-face instruction are direct instruction, problem-based instruction, project-based instruction, simulation-based instruction, discovery-based instruction, discussion-based instruction. We can go on. We'll discuss some of these in greater details in subsequent units. We will also discuss the limitations that these uh, methods have, as well as the mechanisms of implementing these methods efficiently. Each instructional method has several variants, minor differences. Some of the instructional methods are not efficient. We'll discuss these aspects also in subsequent units. And as we mentioned, we should incorporate some principles of learning. Two well-known frameworks followed for instruction design are the Merrill's principles and 9 events of instruction of Gagné. Cole's principles need not be considered perhaps as a separate framework, though some do consider it as an independent framework. But we generally will try to club that with Merrill's principles and make that as one integrated whole but it is possible to base an entire framework only on Kolb. Then it becomes three frameworks. The instructional components are elements of instruction. Now, these are not directly related to the content. They can be used in different contexts and with different contents, but they facilitate effective instruction that can lead to good learning. So, which means that we pick up the components which are suitable for a given kind of content, and these components can help in making the instructor facilitate good learning. Every instructional method uses some instructional components organized as a sequence. Which components are picked up will depend upon the instructor's preferences and design choices. Some examples of instructional elements are getting attention. Again, we will discuss these in greater detail in the subsequent units. Here, we are only looking at an overview of all these issues. So, some examples of instructional elements are getting attention, note making, summarizing or reviewing, graphical methods, cooperative learning. So, this looks slightly intimidating, but if you see very broadly, this figure captures what all we have been discussing, that instruction should be effective, efficient, and engaging. If you see the top left hand corner of the figure, it should be effective, efficient, and engaging, three E's. Then the constructs are instructional approaches, which we saw MOOCs, online, flipped classroom, blended, face-to-face, etc. Then instructional situations characterized by values and conditions. If you see the right hand side of the figure, these are discussed. The values include learning goals, priorities, methods, who has the power. Conditions include content, learner, learning environment, development constraints. Now, if you look at only face to face, even for blended, flipped classroom, online, MOOC, we can elaborate the way we have done for face to face. Is done using a wide range of instructional methods. For convenience sake, we have done this only for face to face. As we discuss the other kind of approaches, instructional approaches, we will do a similar elaboration of how it is done, what kind of instructional methods suit best. Okay. So, for face to face, the instructional methods preferably incorporate Merrill's principles or 9 events of Gagne's instruction. Then they include direct method, discussion based, problem based method, project based method, uh, simulation, discovery based method. So, there are several such methods, and they use instructional components. Not all the components need to be used, or in fact, they are never used, all of them, but the appropriate ones are picked up and used based on the instructor's perception. So, the instructional components are getting attention, analogies, similes, note making, summarizing, repetition, graphical methods, cooperative learning, goals and feedback, hypothesis testing, advanced organizers, reinforcing effect, reflection, and self assessment. We will discuss some of these in subsequent units again. The instructional methods follow a particular content sequencing. That can be several different ways of sequencing the content. It depends both on the content, the instructor, and the other issues like values and conditions. It can be easy to difficult in terms of the content. It can be concrete aspects of the content to more abstract concepts. It can be other way around. We can start with abstract concepts and move towards concrete instances. It can be general to specific in terms of the content that is involved, and it can be elaboration, mentioned briefly at first, then elaborated. It can be hierarchical, it can be procedural, it can be scaffolding. There are so many different ways. We will not be able to discuss all of these in great detail, but some of them we will discuss in the subsequent units. But the basic idea of presenting this is to essentially sensitize an instructor to the fact that there are large number of options available and a large number of features to instruction, and the instructor must be familiar with at least some of them in order to make the best use of the available resources to facilitate good learning. That is the basic intent. This completes our week 1, and in the next week we will have the units which essentially describe the learning frameworks. We understand Merrill's principles of learning and Kolb's principles of experiential learning, and in 5 units we will cover these principles, both of them, Merrill's principles and Kolb's principles. Okay, and we hope to meet again for the next week. Thank you and all the best.